Fame can be a trap. One minute you are America's favorite family. The next you are dancing under disco lights, wondering how it all went wrong. In the mid-70s, television was changing fast. Networks were desperate. Nostalgia was powerful. And one beloved sitcom was pulled back from syndication heaven for a glitter-soaked experiment that nobody asked for. What followed became one of the most infamous collapses in television history. The concept that never should have existed. In 1969, a gentle suburban sitcom called The Brady Bunch quietly entered American living rooms. It was simple. It was warm. It was about blended family chaos handled with patience and soft lessons. During its original run, it was not a ratings giant. But in syndication, it became something bigger. It became ritual, after-school comfort. It was a safe space for millions of kids who saw themselves in that staircase and that orange kitchen. Then came 1976. ABC executives looked at the syndication numbers and saw opportunity. Variety shows were still hanging on. Glitter was fashionable. Big musical numbers felt like appointment television. If the Carol Burnett Show could thrive and the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour could dominate, then why not revive the Bradys in that format? On paper, it sounded clever. Take a beloved cast, add lights, add choreography, add celebrity guests. Instant hit. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The Brady Bunch was never built for spectacle. It was built for small human moments. Jan feeling insecure. Greg wanting to be cool. Carol solving problems with calm logic. Turning those characters into polished stage performers required rewriting their DNA. Suddenly, this family that once argued about chores was performing Broadway-style duets in sequined outfits. The illusion cracked instantly. Worse still, two key cast members refused to participate. Maureen McCormick and Eve Plum declined involvement. Plum's role as Jan was recast with Jerry Reichel, which fans noticed immediately. The substitution felt wrong. The reunion already felt incomplete before the first musical cue began. Behind the scenes, several cast members admitted later that they were not comfortable singers or dancers. They were sitcom actors. Their strength was timing and chemistry, not showbiz polish. Yet contracts and network pressure kept the machine moving. When the series was produced by Sid Croft and Marty Croft, known for extravagant fantasy programming, their colorful sensibility clashed with the grounded Brady tone. What once felt relatable now felt artificial. Audiences tuned in expecting familiarity. What they saw instead was a family transformed into something glossy and unfamiliar. The emotional center was gone. The warmth felt forced. Applause replaced authenticity. And that is where the disaster truly began. Because once a show loses its core identity, it doesn't matter how bright the stage lights are. The connection fades. Suspicion grows. Viewers sense when nostalgia is being used as bait. What ABC thought was a celebration quickly revealed itself as a miscalculation. The concept itself was flawed at the foundation, and foundations matter. But the concept was only the first fracture. The next crack would come from timing. The timing could not have been worse. By the time the Brady Bunch Variety Hour premiered in 1976, the television landscape had shifted in ways executives failed to fully understand. America was not the same country that first embraced the Bradys. The Vietnam War had ended. Watergate had shattered political innocence. Audiences were gravitating toward sharper voices and edgier humor. The culture was restless, and variety television was already gasping for air. For a brief period earlier in the decade, musical comedy hybrids had dominated prime time. But by the mid-70s, viewers were tiring of glitter-heavy spectacle and canned applause. But younger audiences in particular were searching for something that felt contemporary and slightly dangerous. In 1975, Saturday Night Live debuted and immediately disrupted expectations. Its satire was raw. Its humor felt rebellious. It spoke to a generation that no longer trusted polished television smiles. Now place the Brady family in that environment. The series asked viewers to accept that these suburban characters had become stage professionals, performing choreographed dance routines with guest stars. The tonal contrast felt almost surreal. Instead of meeting the moment, the show appeared to be chasing an earlier trend that was already fading. Nostalgia collided with disco-era spectacle, and neither element fully worked. Ratings initially showed curiosity. That was inevitable. The Brady name carried emotional weight. But curiosity is not loyalty. After the first broadcasts, critics were unsparing. Reviews described the production as stiff and oddly joyless. Commentators questioned why the network had stripped away the very qualities that made the original series endure in syndication. Timing in television is everything. Launch too early, and the audience is not ready. Launch too late, and the audience has moved on. In this case, ABC revived a family sitcom in the precise window when America was gravitating toward cynicism and sharper humor. The sincerity that once felt comforting now felt almost out of step with cultural mood. Even the variety format itself was undergoing decline. Grand stage numbers required confidence and charisma from performers. Yet the Brady cast often appeared hesitant during elaborate routines. The contrast with professional entertainers was obvious. Viewers comparing the show to established musical programs could sense the imbalance. 9 episodes were produced, 9 attempts to capture lightning that had already moved elsewhere. The collapse was not immediate chaos. It was quieter than that. Week by week, momentum faded. Enthusiasm thinned. The spectacle grew heavier. Behind the scenes, morale weakened. In interviews years later, cast members, including Barry Williams and Christopher Knight, reflected on the awkwardness of the experience. They fulfilled obligations. They performed the routines. But something essential was missing. Television history is filled with failures, but few feel so inevitable in retrospect. Because sometimes a show does not implode due to scandal or sabotage. Sometimes it simply arrives at the wrong cultural moment, carrying the wrong tone. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour tried to revive innocence in a decade that was rapidly discarding it. And when innocence meets impatience, the result is rarely kind. But timing was not the final nail. The deeper wound was something far more damaging: identity. When a brand loses its soul, television history proves one simple rule: audiences forgive weak episodes. They forgive awkward experiments. What they do not forgive is betrayal of identity. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour did not just struggle because of ratings pressure or shifting trends. It struggled because it dismantled the emotional architecture of the Brady brand. And once that architecture collapsed, there was nothing left to protect it. The original The Brady Bunch was built on domestic intimacy. Problems were small, but relatable. Sibling rivalry, first crushes, teen insecurity. The magic lived in the living room and at the dinner table. Viewers felt like guests inside that home. The show was never flashy. It never tried to impress. Its charm came from restraint. The Variety Hour replaced restraint with spectacle. Bright costumes, elaborate choreography, surreal comedy bits, guest stars stepping into an environment that no longer felt organic. The Brady house became a stage set. The characters became performers playing exaggerated versions of themselves. Instead of watching a family, we were watching actors pretending to be a family, pretending to be entertainers. That layered artificiality created emotional distance. When viewers tune in to a revival, they want continuity. They want reassurance that the characters they loved still exist in recognizable form. What they received instead was tonal confusion. Were we supposed to laugh at the absurdity? Were we supposed to take it seriously? Was it parody? Was it sincerity? The show never answered that question, and confusion breeds detachment. The absence of key cast members deepened the fracture. Replacing Jan with Gary Reichel signaled that authenticity was negotiable. Fans who had grown up with those faces could not ignore the substitution. It disrupted the emotional reunion the network was selling. The chemistry felt altered. The nostalgia felt incomplete. Behind-the-scenes reports suggested that enthusiasm was uneven. Several performers were contractually bound rather than creatively inspired. Variety television demands energy that feels spontaneous. Even the producers known for colorful fantasy programs brought an aesthetic that overwhelmed the simplicity of the Brady universe. Glitter can be exciting, but glitter without grounding becomes noise. The balance was lost. And here lies the deeper tragedy. The Variety Hour did not merely fail as a show. It temporarily distorted public memory of a beloved series. For years, it stood as a punchline, a reminder that nostalgia can be mishandled, a case study in how networks sometimes misread their own properties. 9 episodes. That was all it took. Not a scandal, not a cancellation war, just a quiet recognition that the experiment was fundamentally misaligned. When a show forgets what made people care in the first place, it begins to drift, and when that drift becomes visible, the audience lets go. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour is remembered today, not for its songs or guest stars, but for its lesson. Familiar faces alone are not enough. Without identity, there is no connection, and without connection, even the brightest stage lights cannot save you. The aftermath and the lesson television never forgot. Failure on television is usually loud. Headlines, sudden cancellations, public blame. But the end of the Brady Bunch Variety Hour was strangely quiet. No dramatic scandal, No explosive controversy, just a slow fade into embarrassment. And sometimes that kind of ending lingers longer. 9 episodes aired between 1976 and 1977. Then it was over. A BC moved on. Big schedules shifted. The glitter sets were dismantled. Yet the shadow remained. Within the industry, the show became shorthand for what happens when executives chase nostalgia without understanding tone. It was studied not as a creative risk, but as a cautionary miscalculation. The cast carried the memory differently. Over the years, several members spoke candidly about the experience. They did not describe chaos. They described awkwardness, obligation, a sense that something felt off from the beginning. Interviews with figures like Barry Williams often reflected a mixture of humor and discomfort when recalling those musical routines. Time softened the sting, but not the lesson. What makes this story compelling is that the Brady name survived. In fact, it thrived again in later reunions and television movies. But the brand endured because the original foundation remained intact in syndication. Audiences returned to the staircase, to the familiar theme song, to the simplicity that once defined it. The variety hour became a strange detour rather than a permanent scar. And that detour revealed something powerful about television psychology. Viewers form emotional contracts with shows. Those contracts are built on trust. When a network promises a reunion, it is promising continuity of feeling. Break that contract, and the audience senses manipulation. They may watch once out of curiosity. They rarely stay out of loyalty. The Brady experiment exposed a broader industry truth. A format cannot simply be transplanted onto a property because it is popular at the moment. Variety programming was fading, and youth audiences were gravitating toward sharper humor and more contemporary voices. The show arrived carrying the glow of the early 70s into a climate that had already shifted. In hindsight, it feels inevitable, yet inevitability is only clear after the fact. At the time, executives likely believed they were revitalized cultural treasure. Instead, they created one of the most cited examples of tonal misalignment in prime-time history. And here is the final irony. Today, clips of the Variety Hour circulate online, not with outrage, but with fascination. Some viewers treat it as camp. Others watch with disbelief. It has become a time capsule of ambition colliding with misunderstanding, a relic of an era when networks gambled boldly and sometimes misread the room entirely. Television disasters rarely disappear. Or they transform into lessons. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour stands as proof that even the most beloved family can lose its way under stage lights. Because sometimes the biggest disaster is not the worst show. It is the moment a show forgets who it was. Why it still matters today. It would be easy to dismiss the Brady Bunch Variety Hour as a strange footnote, a glittery misfire from a loud decade. But its collapse echoes louder now than it did in 1976, because the forces that created it never went away. They only evolved. Television still chases nostalgia. Studios still revive dormant properties, hoping recognition will guarantee success. Familiar titles are treated like safety net. Yet the Brady experiment exposed a flaw in that logic long before reboots became routine. Recognition creates curiosity, but it does not guarantee emotional continuity. The original The Brady Bunch endured because it offered comfort. It presented family life as manageable. Arguments were resolved within half an hour. Parents listened. Siblings learned lessons. It was intimate and grounded. That intimacy was its currency. The Variety Hour replaced intimacy with performance, and that shift revealed something deeper about audience psychology. Viewers do not simply attach to characters. They attach to tone, to rhythm, to the emotional environment surrounding those characters. Change that environment too drastically, and attachment dissolves. Modern reboots often struggle with this same tension. Update too little, and the show feels dated. Change too much, and it feels unrecognizable. Or the Brady Project swung hard toward reinvention without recalibrating the emotional core. The result felt like imitation of a trend rather than evolution of a legacy. Another reason it still resonates is how clearly it reflects network anxiety. In the mid-70s, ABC was fighting for competitive advantage. Variety programs seemed safe because they had worked before. Yet safe is not the same as suitable. Executives looked at ratings charts. They did not look closely enough at cultural mood. The country was shifting toward sharper satire and grittier storytelling. Polished musical numbers from suburban parents and teenagers felt disconnected from that shift. The lesson was not simply about one failed show. It was about understanding context, about recognizing that television lives inside culture, not outside it. But when a program ignores that context, it becomes noise. And yet there is a strange tenderness in the failure. The cast attempted something ambitious. The producers invested in spectacle. The network believed it could reintroduce a beloved family to a new generation. The intentions were not cynical on the surface. They were optimistic. That optimism just collided with reality. Today, the Variety Hour is remembered as a disaster of the 70s, but it also serves as a reminder that television experimentation carries risk. Not every revival is destined for triumph. Sometimes it becomes a warning sign flashing for future creators. If anything, the show proved the durability of the Brady identity. The brand survived because audiences separated the misstep from the original warmth. They returned to reruns, or they preserved the memory of the staircase rather than the stage lights. And that might be the final twist. The biggest disaster of the decade ultimately reinforced why the original series mattered so much. Because when the spectacle faded, what people missed was not the songs, it was the living room. How a disaster became a case study. Years passed. Television evolved. The 70s gave way to sharper comedies and more serialized drama. Yet inside industry circles, the memory of the Brady Bunch Variety Hour never fully faded. It transformed from embarrassment into instruction. Producers began referencing it quietly during development meetings, not as mockery, as warning. The show demonstrated what happens when executives assume format is interchangeable. A sitcom is not automatically a variety vehicle. A family narrative does not automatically translate to stage spectacle. Tone is architect. Remove the foundation and the structure tilts. The Croft producers who built elaborate fantasy worlds were not incompetent. They were skilled at their craft. But craft must align with subject. Their visual flamboyance overwhelmed a property built on modest charm. The clash was not about talent. It was about calibration. When calibration fails, even experienced creators struggle. There was also a contractual lesson. Several cast members reportedly participated out of obligation rather than passion. Television chemistry cannot be forced by paperwork. Variety programming in particular relies on performers who genuinely enjoy the medium. Hesitation becomes visible. Audiences sense it in posture and timing. The camera captures discomfort more honestly than executives expect. Another long-term effect involved brand protection. Networks became more cautious when reviving beloved properties. Later, Brady projects returned to scripted formats rather than forcing radical transformation. The industry absorbed the message that familiarity should be respected, not reshaped without purpose. In the decades that followed, reboots became routine. Yet every revival carried an invisible question first exposed in 1976. Are we honoring the emotional contract or exploiting it? That question traces back to this glitter-drenched experiment. What makes the story fascinating is that the Variety Hour never became lost media. Clips survived. Viewers can watch it and judge for themselves. And when they do, they often experience disbelief rather than anger. The songs are earnest, the staging is ambitious, but the disconnect is unmistakable. It feels like a family acting inside someone else's dream. Television disasters usually vanish into obscurity. This one endured because it involved something cherished. When a beloved property stumbles, the reaction is stronger. It feels personal. The Bradys were not just characters. They were part of childhood routines across America. And perhaps that is why the show remains the biggest television disaster of the 70s. Not because it was the worst production ever aired. Not because it was scandalous. But because it represented a moment when a comforting cultural symbol was briefly stripped of its identity. In the end, the staircase outlived the stage, or the theme song outlived the disco lights, and the lesson outlived the embarrassment. Television remembers its failures, especially the ones that teach it how to protect what audiences love. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour stands as the clearest example of how good intention produce the wrong result. It was not sabotaged by scandal. It was not destroyed by controversy. It collapsed because it misunderstood its own identity. The original The Brady Bunch thrived on intimacy and gentle storytelling. The Variety Hour replaced that intimacy with spectacle and expectation. Viewers who tuned in for comfort were handed choreography. Audiences who wanted familiarity received reinvention. The emotional contract fractured. 9 episodes were enough to prove the experiment unsustainable. Yet the disaster never erased the legacy. If anything, it reinforced why the original series mattered. It reminded networks that nostalgia is not a costume you can simply put on. It is a memory that must be handled with care. In the end, the biggest television disaster of the 70s was not about glitter or ratings. It was about identity, and television has been studying that lesson ever since.